What if the real reason you feel stuck isn't because you're lost? What if there's actually a deeper wisdom inside you trying to guide you, but years of fears, conditioning, pressure, and self doubt have made it difficult to trust? So many people spend years trying to force themselves into a life they think they're supposed to live while quietly ignoring the inner voice that keeps calling them forward and upward. In today's conversation, Joan Advent shares what it really looks like to follow intuition through the messy middle of life. From psychotherapy and spiritual leadership to women's wisdom work and conscious money exploration, Joan opens up about the nonlinear journey of discovering purpose, learning to trust yourself, and recognizing the deeper through line that has been guiding her along her journey. If you've ever questioned yourself, felt torn between safety and authenticity, or wondered whether your inner knowing can truly be trusted, this conversation is for you. Welcome to the Conquering FUD podcast. I am your host, Pennie Wilson, and today we have our guest, Joan Advent. Joan, I would love for you to take a second to introduce yourself and tell us about who you are and what you do.
Thank you. Who I am? Well, that could take more than a second. I am I'd say a wise woman, really. If we were in the times of the tribes, I would be one of those people that you would go to if you needed guidance, support, healing of some sort, probably similar to you in that way, Penny. I've worn many hats in that regard. As a psychotherapist, I've worked as a spiritual teacher, guide, leader, mentor. These days, I call myself a mentor and do some transformational coaching as well as teaching.
It's interesting that you say the guide. I remember watching movies like Star Trek, for example, and seeing a character on there, and she was the counselor of the ship, right? And I identified with, yeah, I feel that calling. I feel that. So it's interesting that you put it that way. And really, what it's kind of parallel to what I hope our conversation will turn out today is to explore that intuition, to help others discover exactly how to follow that intuition so that they can discover their purpose. And sometimes things don't unfold the way that we want them to. Sometimes we get caught in perfectionism, trying to do it perfectly. And I would love to help the listeners discover really what that journey looks like from the inside. So, going back to with the way that you have discovered your purpose, what did it look like in the early days for you to hear that intuition and be guided in steps of uncertainty?
Well, in the most simplistic way that I can articulate it, there is this sense of feeling like something is a yes, or I hear about it and I can feel some like buoyancy to my energy, or some sense of I'm curious about that, or I feel like I need to be a part of that. And the other thing that I was just thinking about earlier today, which I will name now and maybe we can unpack, is I do feel like for each of us, there is this through line that we don't necessarily recognize, but is this through line of interest, passion, calling, that is like this homing device that is continuing to send out the signal, from within us. And as we respond to life with this feels like a yes, this feels like a yes. And because I was actually looking back a couple of days ago at some writings I had done 10 years ago at this point, and I was amazed at the same truths just keep coming through and just keep coming out. And so and I think that's true for each of us, that there is this personal through line that is guiding us in some ways, even when we're not fully aware of it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I remember that same experience writing my book, what was it, 20 years ago, and just feeling the guidance of what are the pieces that need to go in this book. And now, after having created the program, I can look back and see, wow, those were the same pieces. It's just incredible, truly incredible to see that looking back. So I love that you were going into your journal and looking back at those pieces. And as you did that, tell us about the clarity that came to you when you could see from a looking back perspective. What did that look like differently than from a now perspective?
So, to be clear, you're asking what it was like to see the reflection of that in
Yeah.
in this moment?
Yes.
There was a little bit, we'll say, of bittersweetness, as
Mm.
in, I think, and this has certainly been true for me, that when we talk about intuition and guidance, that we can't fully talk about that without looking at self-doubt and discernment and those elements. So the part of the bittersweetness was
Mm.
recognizing the clarity that I had then that I wasn't able to fully own then,
Mhm.
that I can see and recognize now that I was so on the right track. And it's almost like if I could go back in time and, whisper in my ear, it's just right. It's exactly right. You're exactly where you need to be.
Beautiful. And probably at the time then, you might not have felt that you were in the right place. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. Yes. Well, there was some, and I don't know what your experience is like, Penny, but for me, I will have these, whether you call it a download or certainly when I'm working with clients, the clarity comes through, and I feel like I can trust it or allow it or have confidence in it in a way that feels different when it's just me with my own head questioning what I'm doing for myself.
Mhm.
So in that moment there was those moments of clarity coming through, but then there might be this what I would call a contraction or a
Mm.
pulling back from
Mhm.
really like going with the momentum of that, if that makes sense.
It sounds kind of like it's a no answer or a reconsideration or a pause or a moment where you just want to check in and make sure things feel aligned.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yes. Am I on the right track? Am I on the
Mm.
right track? And frankly, I used to say at that point that I really wished that I could work with someone, and I'm not saying this in a aggrandizing way, but that I could work with someone like me, because what I could do for others, which I think is true for most of us, I couldn't do for myself in terms
Mm.
of being able to see and hold things in a way that I'm capable of doing for others. And so it's taken a while to really find someone that could hold those reflections and mirror back to me in ways that, just based on my experience, I really needed.
Yes, yes. I love one of the quotes. One of my mentors, he wrote The Power of TED. His name is David
Uh-huh.
Emerald, but he says, we teach what we most need to learn. And that
Exactly.
sounds like that you experience that gap. Like, this is the pain, this is what I need. But that's what allows us to step into that moment of being that solution that we hoped to find back then.
Mhm.
So take it back to the guidance and when you were back in that place, did you feel like you had an idea? Was it big? Was it broad? Was it specific? And did you always know what your purpose was?
Well, not necessarily, although for me, I do think my journey, as I had said, that through line was there. So I've always had a passion for spiritual work and spiritual connection, and I'm a deeply spiritual person. And being in leadership in that actually started as a teenager in a local church youth group that I was active in, and helping to provide transformational retreats for other
Mhm.
teenagers, which I just happened into that. And then
Quote unquote.
right. Exactly. But then, went off to college later, and thought I actually was thinking I was going to get involved in politics and that whole
Mm.
world. So that was, kind of a big departure from the spiritual
Mhm.
world,
Yeah.
but pretty rapidly came back to, and there was also, as I'm sure is true for many people, there was a lot of challenge and messiness in my
Mhm.
growing up years. There was a lot of emotional pain, and so learning how to navigate some of that was like part of some of those early years. But I did have this sense of clarity that change was going to happen more person by person rather than, on a global perspective. That
Right. One
and
by
and
one.
I felt that sense of a yes, of I want to be a part of that. So
Mm,
doing my own healing process from my early years of growing up with just the challenges that we face, and
yeah.
then pairing that with the spiritual piece. I was in my 20s when I really got on board with both graduate school to do clinical work and then also spiritual development and rolling that into leadership. So by my late 20s, I was kind of well on my way, and I've just been doing different versions. Or when my daughter was born, I became really clear that I needed to bring in the feminine or take a serious look at that,
Mm,
because that was something that was out of balance in my growing up. There was a lot of
mhm.
misogyny and disparagement of the feminine, and I grew up in a faith tradition that relegated the feminine to very specific roles. So life, it's like me responding to life, life responding to me, keeps refining and bringing me to the next step and the next step
Exactly.
and the next step
Yeah.
of how to
Yeah.
share my gifts.
The way that I kind of imagine it is like traveling up a mountain, and you can't go directly in one straight line. You got to go zig, zag, zig, zag. And you're learning all of these different lessons that seem like they're not what your purpose is, but it takes you to learn one piece of what those interests are, what your desires are, what your passions are, and helps you little by little to be able to develop your skills and find out really honing in what that feels like and what feels aligned. So you talked a little bit about the no answer, or what I would say a no answer. So you talked
Mhm.
about the yes and what that is calling you forward. What did you discover about places that you went that didn't feel aligned, or how did you recognize what wasn't your calling?
Well, the way I want to answer that, I think the best context for that is looking at business, for example, because I was inspired. Probably we were discussing this painting
Mhm.
before we really dove in, and around that time learning about other women doing business online and being
Mhm.
able to connect with more like-minded people or like-hearted people through those means. This was, again, 13 years ago. I was to start looking into offering my work online. And if you've ever wanted to do that, tried to do that, been around this industry for any length of time, there's like a whole host of how you're supposed to do it. Here's the path to success. Sign up with me and I'll get you where you want to be. And some of those means that I did explore, because there's the promise and you're not sure, and you're new at this, ultimately became a clear no.
Mhm. Yes.
Like, this is not how I can function, that's in alignment with who I am as a person or in integrity.
Yes.
And so for me, that's like the best example I can give of that. Really trusting. What I want to say is, like, trusting when I feel the impulse, when I feel like I want to move in this direction. The quote that I always enjoy is, "What I am seeking is seeking me." So there is this sense of trust that I do think oftentimes just comes with lived experience,
Mhm.
that if I'm feeling drawn in a particular direction, there's meaning in that. Whether you call it God or life or the universe is meaning for me to move in that direction, and that there will be support there. That there will be true aligned support, that I don't have to betray myself. I don't have to do something that's a fit
Mhm.
for maybe everybody else, but not a fit for me.
Mhm.
And that's true for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. And I love how going back to that moment where you found the things that weren't in alignment, doing what everyone said you're supposed to do, and that became a clear no answer. I experienced that same thing for myself, doing all the things, going through all the programs, investing all the time. And in the end, I found out I can't do marketing the way that they tell me to do marketing. I can't. It's out of alignment with my body. My body rebels, it rejects. It's like twisting inside. So, what I am figuring out is, what do I believe? What are the values I need to follow? And finding that alignment within myself and what's going to work for me, which is hard because everybody else says you're supposed to do this, but you got to find your own alignment from within. So you mentioned betraying yourself. So I'm guessing that there was some point where you might have felt disconnected or, going through that journey. How did you recognize moments when you were betraying yourself?
Mm. Well, similar to what you just described in terms of having physical having physical symptoms in response to whatever choice I might be making, having physical symptoms, having internal emotional backlash. I am someone who is sensitive and emotional by nature. I'm not someone that suppresses it. Like if I'm feeling something, I'm feeling it. I
Mm.
know what's going on within me. And early in my life, there are ways that I needed to betray myself as a safety
Yeah.
protection mechanism,
Mhm.
and I've
Right.
created a whole different life where I don't need to do that any longer, and I can honor and bless the wisdom of my younger child self who
Mhm.
needed to sometimes not be true to herself in order to keep herself safe, but
Mm.
that's not the case anymore.
Oh.
But I think often when we have those early experiences, we can fall into that hole again, so to speak,
Mhm.
if the
Yeah.
conditions are right. And it's part of why self knowledge is
Mhm.
very valuable in terms of connecting with our intuition, knowing who we are, knowing what's a good fit for us, and distinguishing that from either family, society, culture, religious conditioning, or
Mhm.
messaging about who we are, who we're supposed to be, and all of that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I like to describe that process as finding your purpose through first looking in, then
Yes.
looking up, and then looking out. But I think
Uh-huh.
where people get stuck is they first look out and they are doing what they're supposed to, quote unquote, do, and they haven't yet checked in. What are your passions? Going back to that beginning, what do you want to do? Because there's two opposite powers, ones that take you up and forward toward what you want, and the other one that pulls you down toward what you fear. So, what do
Mhm.
you feel like blocks people from following their inner knowing?
Frankly, I really think for many of us, it is a safety issue in that we are social beings as mammals. We need
Yeah.
other people to survive. And to any extent, we were given a message from people that we cared about that there's a prescribed way to do it, or there's a prescribed way to be a good fill in the blank, good daughter, good wife, good business person, that to step beyond that and outside of that
Mhm.
is very threatening. And I mean, I'm just going to say that for us as women in particular, there's so much cultural, for lack of a better word, programming around disconnecting us from that source of our power, because I think as women we are innately wired to be intuitive, that our
Wow.
feminine nature is naturally intuitive. And there's so many ways that culture and society works to disconnect us from that, to have us question ourselves
For sure.
in that way. So
Yeah.
again, it's the sense of belonging. Like, we need to have safe places where we can belong, and sometimes we can create that for ourselves, but having even a small community or network of other like-minded people who
Mhm.
can test those things out with and practice.
Yeah, beautiful. Yes, I absolutely agree with the community. And I like how before you said like-hearted. That feels so awesome because sometimes like-minded can feel like a box or constrictive, but like-hearted feels expansive to me. I love that you're honoring that messy middle, that part where sometimes it's not the right time for something to unfold. And in those moments where we need to betray ourselves, as you said, and then trauma happens and we are surviving. But recognizing that all of that has been transformed for what you now have learned is the lesson, the mess that has become your message. So what have you been able to experience as the message from your experiences?
Well, for me, a key message, which is like true through line or homing signal, is that I am sacred, that we,
Mm,
that we are sacred,
mm,
that the deepest truth is that we are sacred and divine, and that we are connected. And for me personally, it was really important to recognize that there is a place that is uniquely mine in the
mm.
family of life, like in the large grand whole, that there is a place for me, and my intent is to embody that. It is to find that place, it's to live from that place, and that ultimately we are this beautiful orchestra or garden, or pick the metaphor you want, where I can only be who I am meant to be, and I can appreciate the gifts of everyone else. And it does in part come back to faith that each of us is meant to be supported in the expression, the divine and sacred expression of who we are, and
Mhm.
that there is the full support of life on our behalf. But the only way we can access that is when we do come home to ourselves in that way,
Mhm.
that we're not
Mhm.
like off pursuing what Susie Q has in the way that she's doing it, or being who our father always thought we should be.
Mhm.
It's like the difference between true sustenance and junk food. you know,
Mm.
just from the
Yeah.
ego perspective,
Yeah.
we get that, whether it's like the likes on social media or the number of followers, or I've achieved the whatever. It's like junk food. Like,
Mhm.
there are times when that can be real nourishment, but to whatever extent we're seeking it from trying to fill some hole, when we don't remember that we're sacred and that our creator and life is always here to support us. So that's kind of a long.
Beautiful. I've often imagined in my own meditations, and there's things I experience in meditation that I can't explain logically, right? And I imagine that there's a place in the center of the earth that's unique to my DNA, unique to my purpose, unique to my energy signature, and that's where I fit exactly because of how I created and because of who I am and all of those things. So I love what you're saying, especially about the metaphor of synergy and the orchestra, because I've imagined that as well. Like we're each an instrument and the music flows through us in our own unique way, whether we're a wind instrument or a string instrument, we're all unique and so beautiful. And as we do work together, we
Mhm.
do find that piece of the puzzle where we fit. So, yeah, that's awesome.
Exactly. And that's
Mhm.
ultimately what our intuition is guiding us to.
Yes. Which, yeah, is the unity and synergy. And how can you work together in love with making the world a better place, finding your way to contribute? I love that. That's so beautiful. So, closing it up now with the final question for someone who is listening that feels stuck or unsure of their next step, where would you encourage them to begin?
Well, the very first step is again to recognize that wisdom exists within you. So it's opening to that possibility that that is the truth. And sometimes we need a steady diet of reassurance and remembrance. So just coming back to the truth that you have these inklings, you have this sense of, I feel drawn to this. I want to say to you, the listener, that is trustworthy. You can trust that. And one place that I often encourage my clients to begin is to really start to look for the evidence, whether it's writing down a list or a place in your journal where you're writing down the places where that impulse came in and you followed it and it was like on track, so to speak,
Mhm.
or even if it's the whole sense of you think about someone and then they call you.
Yeah.
So all those kinds of things where you're building that sense of evidence that you have this inner wisdom and it's trustworthy. And I don't know what it's like for you in terms of what you're teaching, Penny, but the body, in my experience, is where so much of that comes in. So
Absolutely.
whether it's through traditional meditation or forms of movement meditation, I do think that those are the types of practices that can help people tune in, so to speak,
Mm.
or we'll say optimize the conditions to be open.
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I can see that so many times looking back in my experience, learning to trust myself was a matter of understanding that there is, I don't know whether it's knowledge or there, to me, there's not a logical way to explain it, but my body knows. And there was actually a scientific study I read once that explained why that is. But the body knows subconsciously things that we read and see in the world that we can't explain logically. The body knows before the brain. So just trusting that and learning to trust your intuition, trust how your body feels, that is so powerful. And I love that you're leading people back to how to create the optimal conditions for being open to what that next thing is. We can't force it, right? We can't make that come according to our time, but being open to what that next step is. Thank you for being here, Joan. It's such a pleasure.
Yes. And thank you, Penny, for inviting me. It was my pleasure as well. And I want to say thank you to the listeners for spending this time with us.
Yeah. And tell people where they can find you.
So you can find me at my website, which is joanadvent.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook, YouTube, if you look up Joan Advent. And I do have my own podcast there as well, The Crone Codes, which is on Substack and YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.
Okay, fantastic. So great
Thank
connecting with you. Listeners, we hope that you have received so much value from today. We encourage you to find your one next step. Even though it might feel scary, it might feel like it doesn't make sense, find alignment with your intuition. What is the one next step for you? Follow your passions, follow your desires and your interest, and truly tune in to where your unique place is because you are unique, you are incredible, and you do matter. Tune in next time to Conquering FUD through Mental Fitness. I am your host, Pennie Wilson, signing off.